Hello my fellow degenerates, my name is Billy and welcome to the AVN channel's review of Nightly Passion. Nightly Passion is a completed RPG visual novel developed by FEYADA, available on Steam, Patreon and itch. On top of the base game, there are two DLCs, In the Grip of Ice, that seems like a Christmas themed DLC where you get to fight an Ice Queen, maybe? And Between Life and Death, an adventure into the underworld. Between Life and Death is currently reaching its final update, so we'll check out the DLCs at a later date. And some things I will mention before we continue is that Nightly Passion is a 2D anime style game with much deeper mechanics than most AVNs, and free roam is a necessity. So if these things aren't for you, then this game might not be your cup of tea. But let's get into the review so you can see for yourself. But before I continue, I want to say Mahjong will make a return. Mahjong is used to describe the action that two or more consenting adults can partake in, or one adult and a very expensive doll if you're lonely enough. This is because many of my videos are being age restricted. Yes, this channel is for 18+, but age restriction also buries the videos. So I'm going to have to play nice with YouTube and be a bit more strict on my terminology and footage shown. So sorry about this, but we're going PG. The story. Nightly Passion's story is rather complex, but very simple at the same time. The overarching story is simply your sister was arrested and you need to save her. Throughout the game, you're chasing the leads you have about her, but soon start to realise that this simply isn't just an arrest, and her destination is worse than the gallows. It begins to get more complex when you throw in the not-so-side quests. There are a few of these, and it seems optional at the start until you realise that you can't actually progress with the main quest until you've completed most of them. The reason why it gets a little more complex is because a lot of these quests contain their own self-contained story. They are short, but entertaining. Like the abbot forsaking the church to get his stick wet, or you trying to win over a hot elf girl, down to just simply hunting a monster a la Witcher style. Yes, this game takes a lot of influence from The Witcher. You are a hunter and you hunt game and monsters. I mean, look at the main character. That armor, it screams Geralt if he was 80 years younger and still training at Kaer Morhen. Beyond this, I can't really dive much into the story. Not because I'm too worried about ruining it. Ruining?
Really? Are you just trying to piss me off, or is that really how you say that? What are you talking about? I'm talking about this ruined evening. That's not how you say ruined.
But because the video will be an hour long if I talk about each little story in the game. But this is a good problem. Because you have lots of little stories, it keeps things interesting, which in this game it really needs it, because sometimes I felt like it kind of overstayed its welcome. I think I'm finally coming to the end of a main quest and finally gonna find my sister. Then nope, we're all pulled out from under you. Which brings me to my next issue with the story: there is no urgency. Like with most RPGs, I feel like the damn Dragonborn. You know, being granted with this power, and as we all know, a great man once said,
with great power comes great responsibility.
But instead we spend our time frolicking in the fields. Now, maybe our hunter isn't saving the world, but he's trying to save his sister. Right after he hits up some mahjong with this elf, and tears tiles with this nun, and then kills this monster, and drops tiles with this one. Oh yeah, and let me find this kid's cat whilst I'm at it, because that's more important than my sister's life. At least a month minimum went by in game before I got to the end of it. In fact, one of the mandatory side quests requires you to wait a week for it to complete. I'm surprised our sister's still around after how long it took. I honestly started thinking the hunters forgot about her at some points. But the world itself is good, and I think diving deeper into this world could be interesting. However, at this point we're stuck in one district of the city and its surrounding areas, but there are a few of these areas, from the enchanted forest to the dark caves to even lush fields. However, we only get to see a bite size of it. We hear about the elven lands and these great warriors of old, and I'd love to see where this story can take us. The DLC apparently takes place in the underworld, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I do hope the developer does look more into making games into this universe, because it has a lot of potential to become a fully fleshed out world. In Nightly Passion, you play the Hunter. Yes, that's his name. No, you can't change it. Deal with it. This is the same for most characters. You never actually learn their names. Apart from 3 or 4 of the characters, everyone goes by their job names, like Blacksmith, Arms Merchant, or Abbot. As there isn't a huge amount of depth to the characters. Each has their own personality, but it's mainly just surface deep. this isn't a game about diving deep into relationships. No, you're just a hunter doing your job, trying to save your sister, at the same time as starting a mahjong tournament with all the hottest women in town. In regards to the character, the MC, the hunter, is basically Geralt, but a little bit less edgy and a bit more, well, horny. I like him, the character fits the role well. Then we have the nuns. The nuns have a history prior to being nuns, which makes them an interesting cast. The blonde nun is like the older sister to the three. We don't interact with her as much as the others, and it seems she's a bit more wary of people and less likely to trust. Then we have the raven-haired nun, Laura, someone whose name we actually learn. She's a little nympho party girl. She just wants to get wasted and play mahjong. A nun who wants to swallow your vanilla icing. At first, when we start to get to know her, it seems like there's going to be more to her than it just ends in...
We're bang, okay?
Next, we have our sweet little red-haired nun, Marina. If you know anime tropes, she's your typically over-shy girl. She's cute and you can't help but want to help her and care for her. However, she's hiding a little secret. And no, it's not that kind of secret, so don't worry, you're not going to get surprised by a tile tray bigger than yours. And after the nuns, we have a witch. Yeah, she's just your hot goth mummy. In some freaky things, as you'll find out the further you get into the game, and she's a total bitch. I like her. She always has this attitude with the MC, but there's this tension between them. They don't like each other, but at the same time, they want to pound tiles. Sounds like a perfect relationship to me. Then we have our wonderful elf, Elaine. A very elven name. Now, this is one of those fantasy world where everyone opposes those of different race than themselves, or in this case, species. I can't say the actual terminology for this, as YouTube might shout at me. But either way, elves don't like humans, and humans don't like elves. And I don't like cauliflower, it's god awful. However, we can show sympathy for the elf, and help her, and eventually turn her into an ally. Her questline is probably one of the more involved questlines, and it also seems to be her relationship is one nearing the more serious one. The arms merchant, on the other hand, is anything but serious. She pays you to hunt and sometimes gives you a little extra reward if you know what I mean. The relationship between the MC and the arms merchant is more of good friends, joking and winding each other up, just with benefits. It's a kind of fun dynamic and a bit of relief compared to everybody else, so yeah, I like it. We eventually meet the maidservant while saving her from a main questline. We help get her established in town, but beyond that there isn't much interaction with her. We can do the mahjong dance with her, but it's like a one-time thing and we don't really go much beyond that with her. And the final love interest is the governor's wife. She's an unsatisfied housewife and it's our job to satisfy. She doesn't really get introduced until later in the game and Sparta shows up. In fact, I probably even consider her an actual love interest. However, when she does show up, she plays a vital role in the hunter's quest. Now, with all of these I call them love interests, but I use that term loosely. There's no depth to these relationships. Usually it's just someone wanting a good scene to, and we step up to the job. Now, I wouldn't consider it a harem, but you can mahjong around with no consequence. However, the girls have no interaction with each other. The hunter is not in a relationship with any of the girls, so he really is just a single bloke getting his end away. Beyond the love interests, there are several other characters that take relevance in the plot, but one character I do want to mention is this girl. She looks like she's going to play a big part in the game, but then rarely turns up other than one quest. I was disappointed. I won't ruin it for you.
Okay, just so I'm sure, really?
But her character has some great potential and I wish we could see more of her. Hopefully she'll appear more in a DLC. Ah, the mechanics. Recently I said this section is slowly becoming redundant, but this time is different. The mechanics is where Knightly Passion really shines. It's almost to the point where it walks a thin line between RPG and visual novel. Sometimes the game does give you choices and sometimes it does have an impact, but mostly dialogue choices will route back to the same road. There was one where the elf asked you to do something at a certain time. Now usually you may get a quest, I'll talk about them in a minute, but yeah, you'd get a quest to go to the forest at night. You can leave it for a week and then go and everything's fine, just continue with the quest. However, depending on what time you turn up to the forest after talking to the elf will give you a different route and change the way the elf will interact with you. So sometimes you have the odd choice like that, but other times you have two choices, one will lead to death and the other one will just continue the story, so it's not really a choice now. But I mentioned the quests. What are these? Well, they're quests. There are three types of quests: the main quest, the standard quest, and the contracts. Main quest is exactly that, the main story and how you ultimately reach the end of the game, and your sister. Standard quests are given to you by people of a town to help them in return for payment and skill points. And finally, contracts are simply hunting down a certain creature. Most quests are actually mandatory, even the contracts. At one point the main quest won't let you proceed until you've completed most of these side ones. And there's also a day-night cycle, with 4 times a day: morning, afternoon, evening and night. And sometimes you can only trigger a quest or event at a certain time. At first I thought this may seem like you're going to miss on some quests starting if you don't go to a certain place at a certain time, because the game won't tell you unless the quest is already active. But it tends to activate them when you already have a quest to go there. Meaning that if a new quest is going to start at the monastery at night, you've probably got a quest that needs you to go there at night anyway, triggering the new quest. So they are well thought out. And as mentioned, you earn skills, skill points and gold for completing these quests. The gold you can actually spend. You can buy weapons and gear to improve your stats, and your skill points can be invested in the skill screen to upgrade attacks and stats. Skills are what are used in combat. Yes, this game has a combat system, and where it is simple, it's still pretty good. I mean, to be honest, I don't want a stupidly deep combat system. I'm playing a visual novel, so I don't mind it being that simple. But I don't want to be playing Magic the Gathering whilst trying to do a simple visual novel. Basically, you have 6 slots filled with cards with abilities on. You spend AP, or action points, to cast an ability. You get 10 points per turn, and each card costs different amounts. You can upgrade them to make them more powerful and to make them cheaper to cast. The more powerful monsters, the more complicated it can be due to buffs and debuffs, but it never gets too much of a struggle. And if you do find it hard, there are 2 game modes: story and tactical. Tactical's a hard one, everything's just harder. You're going to use loads of health potions, you're going to die a lot. Whereas story mode, challenges and combat are much easier, and you do start off with a much larger health pool. I played tactical and was frequently using health potions. However, I went back through on story mode and I've reached the halfway point and still yet to use a single health potion. And I also don't really feel the need to spend money on upgrading my gear in story mode. For the mechanics, that's pretty much all of them, but we do have some mini games and features as part of quests, but you can skip these if you don't enjoy them. And you also have hidden objects. These can range from chests with items like gold or weapons, or just gold lying around the floor in town, to even picking flowers in a field to get them turned into potions. As mentioned previously, Knightly Passion is an anime game. With hand-drawn assets, this changes my expectations of the game. I'm not expecting a lot of animations or every render to be unique. With this type of art style, it would be unfair to expect the artist to draw thousands of renders at a productive rate and keep the decent quality. But how is this overall quality of the art? You know what, I like it. If you don't mind the anime style, it's good. The characters look crisp and the background images are nice. Each area has its own images, these can slightly vary depending on the time of day, and they have a painted style, and some of them have interactive assets that highlight in blue when you moused over them. The characters are separate from the background for the most part. Anytime there's dialogue, an avatar of the character will appear in front of the background and the background blurs. The characters have different stances and expressions to match the conversation. They stand out and they look good for the most part. I say for the most part because they can look questionable depending on the angle we're looking at them from. But this is mostly due to the animation sequences. Speaking of animations, outside of the Mahjong games, there isn't any. We do sometimes kind of get a comic book strip sequence when we are on important scenes or a scene that are meant to be emphasised, but none of this is animated. However, the UI is also quite nice. The text box is a rather opaque box with a pattern background and a border, but with this type of game, I'd say it suits it nicely. Now, I'm not usually a fan of a opaque text box because it obscures the renders, but since the way the renders are done in this with the characters being above a background, it's not too bad, you're not really missing too much of the scene. The free roam UI is clear as well, navigating is simple, however, you won't know if something is interactive unless you scroll over it. This means that you sometimes might not realise that you can go to certain locations at first. It took me a while before I realised you can physically go to the notice board outside of the menu. The combat UI is easy to understand as well, though you can tell it was developed with mobile in mind. The worst thing about the combat UI is the flying enemies. Frequently their HP bar would disappear above them, causing it to go off screen. This is sometimes detrimental as certain attacks require the enemy to be at a low health, but I couldn't tell what health they were at. It also makes it difficult to determine which enemy to prioritize when you're fighting multiple opponents. Other than this though, it is easy to read. You have your skills at the bottom of the screen, clear and readable, your action points at the top, and debuffs and buffs with your health bar. Though sometimes I wish it would have explained exactly what the debuffs were instead of having to figure it out for yourself. The font of the game though, however, I'm not a huge fan of. It's not a bad font, but it's one of them fonts where some letters are similar. You can easily read it, and I may be nitpicking, but sometimes I have to double take on what I just read. Now, I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, sometimes I feel like a hammer in a samurai's armory, and I struggle to read as it is, so please don't make it any more difficult for me. But overall, I really like the art style. I've not played many AVNs in a 2D anime style before, but I enjoyed it, and it works well for this game. I really like the music in the game. There isn't a big variety, in fact there's very little variety, but I like what it has. The main free roam themes, it's just chilled. Actually reminds me of that one song from Casper. No, not that one. That one. God, I think I'm gonna cry. There are some sound effects during the battle, slashing when you attack and whatnot. But other than that, there isn't really any more sound effects. I was deceived at first. The first scene had some good ambient noise, but after this it doesn't really appear much. In fact, one of the notes that I wrote when I first started the game, the first one was great ambient noise, and then not really for the rest of the game. So, with the little music we have is good, especially if you grew up with Casper, but don't be expecting much in the audio department beyond this. I did not know what to expect with a 2D anime style game when it came to the Mahjong. Now I knew I was going to get a few games in, tentacles and all, but I didn't know what the animation was going to be like. Now don't get me wrong, you're not getting a full anime sequence, but for what I was expecting, the scenes aren't half bad. You still get a lot of full screen renders and a lot of short animation loops. But as you progress in the dialogue, the animation progresses to match it. Yeah, each animation may be only like a 2 to 3 second loop, but the subtle changes are good to match up with what's being said in the narration. And also, speaking of the narration, that is one of the main sources of the Mahjong scenes. Since the game doesn't have highly in-depth visuals during these scenes, it puts work in on explaining the scene through text, and it does a great job of it. And there's also a decent variety of scenes. At the start of the game, it's slow to get them and you have the odd one dropped here and there, but in the late game, you start to get quite a few. At one point, I had about 4 or 5 scenes in the space of an hour. Maybe that's just because how I completed the quests and I tend to bulk hand them in, but still, we start to drop more tiles in the second half of the game. And Mahjonging it up with one of the girls has no consequences with the others, but unfortunately, we can only play 2 players. I mean, a good game of Mahjong with all 3 nuns? I mean, come on. Talk about a missed opportunity. Honestly, picking a best girl for this game was difficult. The girls don't have much depth and are mainly there for the Mahjong appeal and quest reveals. But I had to choose one, so I did, and that girl is Elaine. Yes, the elf girl. This could be simply due to the fact that her quest is probably one of the most involved out of all of the girls, and the end result is the closest it comes to an actual relationship. But it's not just that. I really liked her storyline, going from this feral elf hating humans to learning about human culture and falling in love with it, realising the prejudice she's been raised upon is most part unfounded. It's the typical, look, we can all get along if we try, we may differ but we can work together kind of thing. But I like the story and I think she will have a bigger part in the DLC, hopefully. Overall, the game looks great, it has nice visuals and I got what I expected from a 2D style game. The story is entertaining but the side quests are where it really shines since there isn't real urgency to save your sister. You know, she might already be dead so it makes no difference if we play a few games of Mahjong first, she'll still be dead. Audio wise though, it ain't the best. It has its basics, some decent music and a little sound effects here and there, but nothing too special. And as for the Mahjong scenes themselves, I was actually pleasantly surprised. However, it's a variety of mechanics where this game shines, so if you're looking for a game that has a little more to offer than a standard AVN, this game may be for you. It could easily serve as a bridge for those who are wanting to get into AVNs, since it has quite a few mechanics similar to those found outside of AVNs in games such as RPGs. So, would I recommend you check this game out? Yeah, I'd say it's a fun game with a decent amount of content, and I believe the main game is complete as well, so check it out, it's pretty fun.